Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Sunday, February 26th, 2017 edition of VR News. Bit of a slow news night, but that's not a big deal because the first story specifically is really freaking good news, and it's good news for VR in general. So let's start there. The New York Times conducted an interview with Andrew House, who is Sony's global chief executive. He indicated they had sold 915,000 PlayStation VR units. He also indicated that their goal was to hit the million mark by 6 months. So with 85,000 units to go and 2 months to do it in, they've still got a third of their time available. They should be able to clobber that. And that's pretty good news. But it gets even more interesting. This wasn't in the article, but I remembered seeing some other numbers. And if you run some quick calculations, it tells an interesting story and gives you an interesting theory. So let's get down to it. We know about a week ago, it was announced that 288,000 Resident Evil 7 players played the VR version of the game. Well, now we know the install base. We also know that 3 million units of Resident Evil 7 sold. And we also know that worldwide there's 53 million PlayStation 4s out there. So running some calculations, it shows us that of those who could play Resident Evil 7 VR, 30% did, which is a huge number. Huge because look at the difference. Of the 53 million PlayStation 4 owners, 3 million purchased Resident Evil 7. That percent is only 5%, significantly lower, 6 times lower. So almost 7 times lower. So what does that tell us? Well, it seems to indicate, and it might just be a one-off, again, these are rough calculations, it may indicate that a PlayStation VR owner is more likely to try a genre or game outside of their comfort zone than they normally would. Maybe it's, like I said, just Resident Evil 7, but a dev looking at that, they're going to say, look, we aren't as big as Resident Evil 7, but if we can hit 15% of the install base, well, that would be like having 2.5 million PlayStation VRs out there instead of the, 915,000. So the devs suddenly get a bit more confidence that, you know what, PlayStation VR owners, by and large, are gonna buy good games because they're starved for good games. And that's a good freaking thing for PlayStation VR in general. It's also good because it's going to change the narrative somewhat. We've got a good story instead of all of that negative dribble that we've been hearing the last 2-3 months, right? VR, like 3D, blah, 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 blah. From that point of view, it's also good. So really interesting. There's that. There's also, remember back in December when they went radio silent, there was some concern. They had just launched this thing. It's been a couple of months and now we hear nothing. And yet there were supply chain issues. People who wanted PlayStation VR couldn't buy it. And the two didn't jive with each other. But most of us felt because of the supply chain, it was likely, the closing of that studio and all of that was just bad communication and bad timing. That the reality was it's doing well. Well, we now know that was likely the case. And they were probably so concerned and scrambling to make the supply chain work and get units out there. The last thing they were doing was a concerted effort of marketing. So I do think that's going to ramp up over the next few months. But like I said, very, very good news for VR. Next news story, still on the topic of PlayStation VR, is what Upload VR billed as their secret weapon. Now, I'm not going that far. I'm talking about the aim controller, which now has a release date of May 16th. Now, this was first spotted when we looked at a game called Farpoint. believe it was Farpoint. And it kind of looked very Starship Trooperish, beautiful, fantastic, exploding aliens with really good effects for that. And there was a recent posting up on GameStop's site that listed the bundle, the game and the controller, for $79.99. Now, when I look at that, there's a couple of things that come to mind, and I'll be interested to hear your guys' thoughts. One is, it looks an awful lot like a certain Wii gun, and it really does. Now, granted, I noticed there's an analog nub there, and some buttons and a trigger, so it's not just putting a move ball on the front of some PVC. I get that. It's got added. But at the end of the day, it really, functionality-wise, it's not much different than what we did with PVC, mounting a Vive controller on there, or what people are going to do with the tracker. But still, kind of cool. It's definitely going to feel better to shoot things, because on the touch and the Vive controller, to me, it feels good. Shooting things with the Move controller, though, awkward, because it's a cylinder and it just doesn't feel like any weapon would ever feel, I guess, other than a sword. But there you go. So that's the AIM controller, May 16th. Next story concerns Samsung announcing yet another GearVR variant, but this isn't a whole new model with a different color. It's basically to sell a new controller. It's like a remote control, a trackable controller. Apparently there are 70 games already in development for this controller, so they basically taken a page out of Google Daydream's playbook, offered their own. Looks a lot like that, and it looks a lot like, of course I can't find it now, the Rift remote. So what's this going to be able to do? Well, like I said at the outset, mostly the tracking aspect will be nice. That opens up a lot of gaming experiences, and I would bet that the majority of those 70 that are in development are probably going to utilize, some interesting aspect of that. Next one, very interesting statistics that Vive Users, and this is very Vive-centric because it was an HTC survey for VR. Now, could some of it be cultural? I suppose it could, but for me, yes, I know that the demo for gamers who happen to be female may be smaller in certain areas and male others, but by and large, I grew up with girls who were into games. My daughter's a gamer, my wife's a gamer, so I've kind of never not been in touch with female gamers. They've been a part of my gaming life, high school and on. But interesting that 95% are Vive users, and that they spend 5 hours per week in VR. That indicates only 5% are female, which I find strange. But I had a look at my own channel, and equally there, I know there's definitely females who watch and they've commented, but the statistics are almost bang on, except they're even a little more severe on my channel. It's 97% male, 3% female. So just interesting. I don't know what that shows other than, maybe in China it's a little different. Again, I don't know enough about, Chinese mainland culture, which I'm sure changes from province to province, town to town. But yeah, those are pretty lopsided statistics. All right, guys, that is it for the Sunday news. Hopefully a game up next, work week, etc. Cheers.